Welcome to the program Let's Talk right here on ieTV. I'm Kirk Meighoo. Thank you so much for joining us today. So my guest today is Dr. Kirk Meighoo, and Dr. Meighoo is a former lecturer at the University of the West Indies in Trinidad and Jamaica and was a founder of the University of Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Meighoo has the unique honor of being the only West Indian to have launched a book in the UK House of Commons in Westminster. He also served as an independent senator and also in various governmental capacities, including Vice Chair of the Constitutional Reform Subcommittee of the Vision 2020 process and on the President's Committee for National Self-Discovery. Dr. Meighoo is author of Politics in a Half-Made Society, Trinidad and Tobago 1925 to 2001, and co-author of Democracy and Constitution Reform in Trinidad and Tobago with Court of Appeal Justice Peter Jamada. He appeared extensively on radio, television, and newspapers in Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, on the BBC, and in the New York Times, also in Mauritius and Singapore, and addressed the topic of media and good governance. Welcome, Dr. Meighoo. Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thanks for inviting me, and thank you for your viewers.
It's a very well-read gentleman with us today, and we're going to speak a bit about constitutional reform. Now, for many of us, some of us actually don't know what constitutional reform is. So, Dr. Meighoo, can you enlighten us? What is constitutional reform?
Well, basically, the Constitution describes the way we're governed and the way we make laws, right? So it's kind of the laws that govern the laws. Okay. You understand? So,
right.
So it's the top. It's the way we elect our heads of government, how we can remove our heads of government, how we spend money, these sorts of things. That how the police runs, how the army runs. Right. So it's how it describes how the system runs.
How the country is run.
Well, no, because the cabinet will run the country,
okay,
right, and the government will run the country. Right. So this is kind of like say let's use a computer, right, as an analogy. You could have different programs, and one would be a UNC program, one would be a PNM program, whatever. But the software, is it Windows, is it Apple's, or,
right,
is it OS or whatever? So you have Windows XP, or do you have Windows 10, or do you have Windows 8? Did you upgrade? So it's kind of like the operating system. The Constitution is like the operating system.
Okay.
So do you have an Android phone, or do you have an iPhone?
Right.
It's like that.
It's like that. Okay, so just now you said in terms of how the government is run. So there's a state, mm-hmm, and there's the government.
Correct. So the Constitution, I guess, is part of the state, and so the government changes every, let's say, 5 years.
Roughly.
The state doesn't. Right? The state is always there. Right. So, for example, there was a period in 2001. During the 1818, where we had no government, but we had a state.
We did.
Right? So the police is part of the state. Right? And it's not, the government now has a political part. Other aspects of the state are not supposed to be political as such. Right?
Right.
So there are political parts of the state and non-political parts of the state. Right? So
right,
in terms of things like the president is supposed to be a non-political part, right? The police, the army, these things are supposed to be non-political, and it's supposed to be running. Right? Even the ministries are supposed to be non-political.
However,
the ministries, right? Exactly. And in Trinidad and Tobago, we confuse the government and the state.
We do.
We confuse the government and the party. Right? People refer to the PNM as the government. People say, the PNM educated me. Or, look what Kamala did.
Right.
But was it her money?
It wasn't.
Was it the UNC's money? Was it the PNM's money?
No.
It wasn't. It's the state's money, right? When we pay taxes, we don't pay taxes to the PNM. We don't pay taxes to the UNC, right? We pay taxes to the state. Right? So the state is there that has the money, right? And then the government is there, supposed to spend the money, and now the parliament is supposed to, and this is what, we don't even understand how a proper government is supposed to be. Basically, we have the idea of the slave master, and we still have that in Trinidad. So I am the boss man, and what I say go. I hope I didn't bang my mic there, but that's so whatever so no, not a damn dog bark, right? That's what Eric Williams himself said, right? So I am the boss, and you cannot tell me what to do. I am prime minister. That is not how a democratic republican constitution works, right? The money is not the prime minister's money. It's not the government's money, right? It's the people's money, and the government spends it on behalf, right? But not even the government can access that money straight. The parliament is supposed to grant the cabinet and the prime minister access to that money, and they can say no. However, in our system, that has never happened. For example, let's say the appointment of a prime minister.
Right.
We have never had let's say you could say a recall of a prime minister or a removal of a prime minister by the parliament, right? A vote of no confidence. That's what it is in the parliamentary system. We've never had a vote of no confidence. That's happened in well-functioning democracies. That happens, right? In England, right? They brought down Margaret Thatcher, who was so powerful as a prime minister. But for many reasons, because of some of the flaws in our constitution, but by and large, our constitution is pretty good. It's just that we don't follow it, right? That's so. In that sense, you can say, and what I've argued is, well, if we have a good constitution on paper, but we don't or can't follow it, well, then it's not a good constitution in that sense, because a constitution needs to come out of the culture and history of the people. Right? It's not something you have to study and learn in the sense that it's totally alien. The Constitution of Great Britain, they actually don't have a written constitution, but it comes out of their history and heritage. Right? The Constitution of the United States comes out of their history and heritage. The Constitution of France comes out of its history and heritage. You understand? The Constitution of ancient Rome came out of it. So and it's supposed to reflect the culture and character and norms and morals and the sense of right and wrong of a people.
Right.
You understand? And what we think of as as just or unjust.
But you mentioned in terms of our constitution. So we were speaking before we came on set in terms of our constitution is basically a copy and paste of many other constitutions. Why don't we have our own constitution to this time?
Well, in fact, when you look at our history, Trinidad and Tobago, we were making our own constitution. A very good constitution, in fact. For instance, the constitution under which Eric Williams was elected in 1956, 1955, because 1925 was the first democratic. Well, 1921 was the constitution. Well, no, that was the Wood Commission. But let's say 25 it came in effect. Then we had another change in 41 and 81. We had one in 33, but 41, then 1945, then 1950, then 1955, and at each of these stages, there were changes. One, to get more elected people and less unelected people. And then we had a system where it was kind of like a built-in coalition power sharing system. Because before the PNM came in politics, there were a whole bunch of independents, whatever political parties existed, didn't exist throughout the whole country. It would be just like, in South or in Port of Spain or in Tobago or in the East or something like that, right? And then when governments were formed, like Albert Gomes' government, the 5 ministers came from 5 different parties, and they were also 5 different races. Right? There was a Chinese, a Syrian, a white, a Creole, and the Chinese. They were all working together, and the system was that the power was not in the head of government.
Okay.
Right? The legislature would have to vote in the cabinet. Very similar to the way the United States Congress has to ratify the cabinet ministers and so forth, and secretaries of state and whatnot. And the legislature in Trinidad at the time, Trinidad and Tobago at the time, could also remove a cabinet minister with a 2/3 majority secret ballot.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
That's a far more advanced constitution we had in 1955.
It is.
Right? But when Eric Williams came, he did not like that constitution at all, and he fought tooth and nail to he used quite strong language. I think he might have even called it a bastard constitution.
Wow.
I mean, he didn't like it at all. He wanted power to be concentrated in the prime minister, right? And the argument he used publicly, right, in his speeches was that, well, if it's good enough for Great Britain, then it's good enough for Trinidad and Tobago, and that's it. And people just accepted it, and they didn't question. Well, I shouldn't say that, because the DLP, the PDP, the DLP, and the POPPG, that's Albert Gomes' party, right? These are some of the big political people.
Right.
We've written these people out of history, and it's so sad because we have so many great people, and in our history, and people think that politics started in 1956 with Eric Williams, and there was nothing before,
right.
And that's not the case at all. In fact, he changed politics completely.
But do you think he had ulterior motives?
Oh, yes. I mean, he wanted basically the power to make independent Trinidad in his image, and he basically did.
He was even quoted as what, the father of the nation?
Yes, that's a term I highly disagree with. He was not the father of Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago existed well before he was
right.
born.
Right.
Right? So he did not create the nation. Right? He did not create the nation.
But given our constitution as it is right now, present day, do you think the prime minister has more power than the president, even though the president is technically the head of state?
Yes, absolutely. That is true. Now, and that anomaly comes from Great Britain. Right? I mean, C.L.R. James wrote in Beyond the Boundary, which is one of the great books. He said, "What do they know of cricket who only cricket know?" Right? And that actually comes. I can't remember the poet now. Forget. But he paraphrased that from a poet. What do they know of England who only England know? But the and the case is true with Trinidad and Tobago, right? So if you want to know the Trinidad and Tobago Constitution, you have to also know other constitutions in the world.
Right.
So this came from Great Britain. Great Britain used to be a monarchy, right? And then they had a revolution. They cut off the king's head. They had a parliament supremacy for a while. No king. It was a republic for a little while under Cromwell. But then they actually invited the king back. And then they developed a constitutional monarchy, right? And so over time, so now the novel idea was that the king did not have absolute power,
right,
but was restrained by a parliament to a degree, right? So over time, this comes from Magna Carta, which is from, I can't remember, I'm forgetting the year, like 1213 or something, somewhere around there, or 1135, something like that, right? 11th, 12th century in England. Can't believe I forgot that date. But so that was when the barons now fought against the King of England and saying, well, you just can't say what you want, right? So they fought wars for that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they killed people for that kind of stuff. And then, so the king said, okay, I'll give up some of my rights for peace in the kingdom. So then later on, by 1620, that's when you had the the English Revolution, where they cut off the king's head, and that had to do with so much religion, blah, blah. But then you had 1688, the Glorious Revolution. So you have these developments there, where over time, the monarch started to get less and less, and the parliament started to get more and more. So that the monarch is largely a figurehead in Great Britain. So we kind of inherited that, in that the Governor General, who represented the Queen, was largely a figurehead because, well, first the Parliament of Great Britain ruled, and then later what became Parliament here was supposed to rule. So that's why. But the fact is that I think most people understand instinctively just one leader, right? And it's kind of difficult for them to kind of grasp this idea of a president and a prime minister.
Because the president is a silent partner.
Sorry?
The president is therefore the silent partner.
Yes, and you see, whereas in England, the monarch sort of makes sense. There's a history, it goes back, to Henry VIII and Henry II and, William of Orange and all sorts of things, and it embodies the history. The president does not embody our history.
Right.
It's just a vestige of the old relationship to England, and so if we mature one day enough to start to make our own constitution again, which I think we need to go back to what we had in 55 and evolve from there.
From there. Okay, we go to a short break and return with the program Let's Talk. Stay tuned.
It's time to get interactive. Introducing ieTV's People Report, the place where you tell us your concerns. Highlight your issues within your community and let us help you. Call our newsroom at 222-0108 or 222-6177 or email us at ietvnews1@gmail.com. You can also connect with us on Facebook, ieTV News Trinidad and Tobago. We'll hear your concerns and let your voice be heard. ieTV's People Report, where your opinion matters.
Welcome back to the program Let's Talk right here on ieTV. I'm Bina Mahis. Today on set we have Dr. Kirk Meighoo, and we're talking about democracy and constitutional reform in Trinidad and Tobago. Speaking of which, Dr. Meighoo is actually the author of the book Democracy and Constitutional Reform in Trinidad and Tobago. And one of the questions we have for you, Dr. Meighoo, is, in terms of constitution, can we as a people, can an entire population determine our constitution?
Well, there's always going to be differences in any society, but there should be a way for a constitution to have legitimacy among at least the majority of the population, and the way the PNM did it, and I have to speak that way, not because I'm against the PNM or anything like that, but that's just history.
Right.
And these are just the facts. When when they did it in 1961 to change the constitution, and the idea was that, well, if once you give us power to be government, then and we have a majority in the parliament, well, then we could do what we want.
Right.
And so we could change the constitution because you voted for us. So it's kind of like, voting cat and bag. In a sense, you when you vote for a party, it's like whatever they want. So really, in a republic, right, there's many more checks and balances. It's not you could just do whatever you want. You have to go through various vetting processes, or sometimes the government may not even have ultimate authority for certain things. And it's just to make sure that a government doesn't do radical changes, surprise changes, things that, all of a sudden say, I declare that my salary shall be $10 million. right? Well, you
Right.
voted for me, so I could do that,
Right.
you know?
Exactly.
Right, so what's stopping you from that? And it's the Constitution that stops you from doing that, right? So who is in charge of the money? How is it voted and all these sorts
But
of
still, regardless, I believe that it still happens.
things. Yes, because then when you have the majority and you are in government, then you are voting for yourself. So it loses the purpose. When your parliament is always the same as the head of government, then there's no check and balance unless, you see, and this is where it comes to culture too, unless, like, say in America, a Democrat will be against a Democratic president, or a Republican will be against a Republican president, or in England, the Conservatives might be against their Conservative Prime Minister. So some Labour people will be against their Labour Prime Minister, right?
Right.
So the parties are democratic, they represent views of people. Different factions are allowed to exist,
Right.
right? And it's not just supposed to be there's one view and any other view must be suppressed, and if you dare express another view, well, you're out, right? I mean,
Right.
now that one is not constitutional, that's cultural, right? That's not in the Constitution. That is our plantation slave culture,
Right.
So if you're the boss, well, everything you say goes,
Right.
right? And you cannot tolerate dissent because it's so insecure, basically,
Right.
is what it is.
So
right?
in 1955 and 1956, we inherited a constitution, and it was concrete in terms of Eric Williams leaving it that way. Why hasn't it changed? What is it keep back?
Well, because you need a parliamentary majority to change the constitution, right?
But why
which
so
I think
long?
is a good thing. Well, I think that most prime ministers, when they're in power, they like all the power, right? So you had NAR, who came in with 33 seats, and you had 3 opposition. They could have done anything to the constitution they wanted, anything they wanted, and they didn't.
So, you know,
Right.
there's a quote by Lord Acton, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yes.
Do you think, I may be wrong for saying this, but do you think it's like you mentioned, the power, is it power by one head or by one person, or the need for power is holding our country to ransom?
Yeah, I think that, you know, the political parties, well, they obviously don't have the will to enact constitution reform,
Right.
and not in any meaningful sense, right? I mean, that's obvious because they've had periods of time where they could have done it just with their own party, right? Now, an interesting thing about our constitution at present and the independence constitution is that it was passed totally over any and all objections of the opposition, right? And when the PNM put in the 1962 constitution, well, the 62 is basically the 61 constitution with a few changes. When the 61 constitution was introduced, the DLP had all sorts of, they had 118 amendments. They objected to all the changes Williams made to concentrate the power in the Prime Minister. So that would include the Elections Commission, the Boundaries Commission, because there were 2 at the time, power over the Commissioner of Police, all these things that the DLP were against all that power being concentrated in the Prime Minister. And in fact, we almost didn't get independence because of it.
Okay.
Right? Not only did you have the DLP at the Marlborough House Conference in Britain discussing the Independence Constitution, you had an organization called the Indian Association of TNT, led by H.P. Singh. Ken Lala was also a member of that, and other people. And they advocated that, they said that there's no way that Trinidad and Tobago should be independent under that constitution, because it would mean that the minorities would be, I suppose, oppressed, right? And by minorities, they meant mainly the Hindus and to a certain extent the whites and others, right? And they said if if there was not guarantees for minority representation in government. This is what the Indian Association had said, and they were up there in England. And to this day, I should really clarify this with Mr. Lala about how they got there, but because they weren't a party. But
Right.
they said we should divide Trinidad and Tobago in half, right? So they
Right.
suggested partition if the PNM were going to insist on that constitution, right? There should be partition. So that's how drastic it was, and this is some of the history, because history, shapes our constitution.
It does.
What happened is that it was going nowhere, stalemate, and Williams wanted this thing so bad because Jamaica was going to be independent August 31st,
Right.
right? August 1st in 62, and he did not want Jamaica to be independent so much more than Trinidad, right?
Right.
Which is why we pulled out a federation too. Because we were supposed to be independent as the West Indies as a whole, not just as Trinidad and Tobago or Jamaica or Grenada or Barbados
Wow.
or Guyana or something. So they took a lunch break and they had a secret meeting between Capildeo and Williams. And they agreed to certain things, and then Capildeo said, okay, we'll agree to the Constitution.
Wow.
And many of the DLP people, Peter Farquhar, and the people who were there at the negotiating table, were stunned. Just reversed everything. And what you have to say happened after that was then Capildeo was allowed to remain leader of opposition in Parliament while still lecturing at the University of London.
Wow.
So that was a terrible thing. And then the next constitution we had, and then they had the voting machines, all the things that the DLP were against. But then the next constitution we had in 76, what happened by then is that there was a no vote campaign in 71. So there was no opposition. So the
Wow.
PNM passed a Republican constitution without any opposition input again.
Wow.
And that's the constitution under which we are governed to this day. Right? So there was no opposition in in that parliament, and in the previous parliament it was just rammed down the throat.
But Dr. Meighoo, it boils down to one major question. As a result of this, are we really a democratic nation?
Yes, let's not lose perspective here, right? This is not we do have elections, right? And governments have changed. And when they have changed, it's not like Fiji, right? In Fiji, there wasn't even an Indian prime minister. There were just a lot of Indians in government. And the Fijians revolted, put out the government, put a clause in the constitution that the prime minister of Fiji can only be of Fijian descent. So therefore, an Indo-Fijian could not be prime minister. So we've not had things like that. We've not had although in 61, there was a lot of election violence, but we've not had the scale of Guyanese violence and fraud.
Right.
There have been irregularities, and there is gangsterism involved in our political mobilization, right? And it's been increasing, right? And those are dangerous trends. But we are a functioning democracy. Could we do better? Of course, and we definitely should do better. Right? Are we the ideal democracy? By no means are we the ideal democracy, right? But to say that we are not a democracy, I think that's pushing it too far. There are places in the world that are not democracies. I've visited some. We're not that, right? We are not Venezuela, for example.
Right.
Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So are we free to opt out of our constitutional obligations?
Not legally, right? That's when you get a revolution.
Right.
That's what Abu Bakr tried to do.
Right.
Right? We can change our constitution, right? And I was part of the Vision 2020 committee, and we had our recommendation, and what our committee had recommended was that we should have a referendum to approve a constitution and have it be broadly participatory in terms of formulating it, right? Of course, the governing party should have a leading role. As the governing party, there is a democratic mandate, but there should be the roles of others, and it should be ratified by every citizen in a referendum. Right? But that was not taken up, and instead, Patrick Manning wanted to have this constitution that he had secretly drafted by Ellis Clark. Thankfully, he did not get a constitution majority in 2007, or else that would have been our constitution. We would have not had the Privy Council anymore, and Chief Justice Ivor Archie would have been our head of, would have been the ultimate authority.
Right.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. So we're about out of time for today, though, but definitely we would like to have you back and continue our talk on the Constitution and constitutional reform.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us on the program Let's Talk on ieTV. To view a repeat and for any further questions, you can be sure to email us or contact us at the number at the bottom of the screen. Thank you and do take care.